My sister told me there's no seat for a poor single mom like you at my wedding. So, my 5-year-old son and I stood in the corner. Then he pointed to the bride and said, "Mommy, what about the baby in her tummy?" The moment he spoke those words, the groom started trembling. Sarah Thompson, who worked at a general hospital in Boston, was staring at the clock with a tired expression. It was 7:00 p.m. Her shift was over, and tonight she would make it in time to pick up Ethan from daycare. Sarah was a single mother living with her 5-year-old son, Ethan. Her reputation as a nurse was excellent, and she was trusted by her colleagues. But balancing work and childcare wasn't easy. "Sarah, you can go home now. You did well today," her colleague Linda kindly called out. Sarah returned a grateful smile and headed to the locker room. While changing from her uniform into casual clothes, she checked her smartphone. There were 3 missed calls, 2 from her parents and 1 from her sister, Emily. A call from Emily was particularly unusual. While driving, Sarah recalled the events of 3 years ago, her sudden divorce from Michael. One day, he left, saying, "I wasn't ready to support a family," and disappeared. For the first few months, he paid child support. But eventually, that stopped too, though she consulted a lawyer. They couldn't locate Michael, and Sarah ended up shouldering everything alone. When she picked up Ethan at daycare, his eyes lit up at the sight of his mother. "Mom, I drew a dinosaur today." Ethan ran to Sarah, proudly holding up a paper colored in green and brown. Sarah stroked her son's head and promised, "That's wonderful. Let's put it on the refrigerator when we get home." Back at the apartment, Sarah gave Ethan a shower and prepared a simple dinner. While watching her son finish eating, she finally decided to respond to the missed calls, starting with her parents. When she answered, her mother Margaret's excited voice rang out. "Sarah, have you heard? Emily got engaged to a wonderful young man named James Wilson. He works at an investment firm in Connecticut. Didn't Emily call you?" Sarah couldn't hide her surprise. "No, I had a missed call from Emily, but I haven't called her back yet." The relationship between Sarah and Emily was complicated. Emily was raised as the apple of their parents' eye. There weren't major problems between them as children, but their relationship deteriorated rapidly when Sarah took a break from college to get pregnant and married. Emily always criticized Sarah's choices, repeatedly saying, "You could have had a better life." Their parents, Thomas and Margaret, stood between the two, trying to maintain family peace. After ending the call, Sarah called Emily. After 3 rings, Emily's refined voice came through. "Well, Sarah, you finally called back. Congratulations." "Emily, I heard you got engaged." "Yes, thank you. James is truly wonderful. His father is an executive at an investment firm, and they're giving us a condominium in New York's Upper East Side as a wedding gift." Sarah took a deep breath. She was used to Emily's boasting, but this time, she seemed even more proud than usual. "That's lovely. So, when's the wedding?" "Next month. We're in a hurry. James's company is planning to transfer him to their London branch." The conversation continued with Emily explaining the details of her lavish wedding plans, and finally she added, "Of course, I'll send you an invitation, but the dress code is strict, so make sure you prepare appropriate attire." Those words implicitly meant this might be beyond your financial means. A week later, a luxurious invitation arrived at Sarah's apartment. Inside an envelope trimmed with gold foil was an invitation to a wedding at a high-end hotel. However, there was no seating chart included. Feeling anxious, Sarah called Emily again. "Emily, thank you for the invitation, but there was no seating chart." On the other end of the phone, Emily laughed coldly. "There's no seat for a poor single mother like you. You can stand if you come. Or is it that you don't want guests to think you're part of my family, seeing your appearance?" Sarah was speechless. Her sister's cruel words hurt her heart. "Emily, listen, Sarah, you made your choices. I'm just living my life. Mom and Dad insisted I invite you, so I did. Actually, I'd rather you didn't come." The call abruptly ended. Sarah collapsed on the sofa and cried. Ethan came out of the bedroom and looked at his mother with concern. "Mom, are you okay?" Sarah wiped away her tears and smiled at her son. "I'm fine, Ethan. Mummy's just a bit tired." She decided in her heart she would attend her sister's wedding for her parents and, more than anything, for her own pride. While embracing her son, Sarah whispered quietly, "We are members of the Thompson family. No one can change that." On the day of the wedding, Sarah was adjusting Ethan's bow tie as he got dressed. She checked her appearance in the mirror several times. Her simple navy blue dress was something she had bought a few years ago, but fortunately, it was still wearable. She didn't have expensive jewelry, but a small pearl necklace gifted by her mother adorned her neck elegantly. "Mom, do I look handsome?" Ethan put his hands in his pockets, trying to act like an adult. Sarah smiled and gently stroked his hair. "You look very handsome. Don't forget to mind your manners today, as it's a special day." During the taxi ride to the hotel, Sarah's stomach ached with nerves. Despite being invited, she knew she wasn't truly welcome. Nevertheless, she was determined to enter the venue with her chin held high in confidence. Upon arriving at Boston's luxury hotel, Four Seasons, an elegant sign reading Wilson and Thompson Wedding was placed at the entrance. Luxury cars lined the surroundings, and doormen welcomed the guests. Sarah took Ethan's hand, took a deep breath, and stepped into the hotel lobby. The wedding venue was decorated with luxurious white and gold ornaments. Giant chandeliers shone from the ceiling, and the space, filled with the scent of roses, was already crowded with many guests. Women were dressed in the latest designer dresses, and men wore perfectly tailored tuxedos. Sarah felt a moment of embarrassment about her modest attire, but quickly composed herself. Finding her parents at the entrance, her mother Margaret rushed over. "Sarah, thank you for coming. Ethan, can you say hello to Grandma?" Ethan politely bowed and said, "Hello, Grandma." Thomas also approached and kissed Sarah on the cheek. Her parents clearly had apologetic expressions. "The seats?" Sarah began to ask. Thomas averted his gaze. "I thought Emily would have told you." Margaret interrupted her husband. "You two can stand near us. We'll be close by." Sarah swallowed her words. She understood that her parents couldn't go against her sister's decision. When the music signaling the start of the ceremony began to play, guests started taking their assigned seats. Sarah and her son stood to the side, watching the ceremony. With the solemn sound of the organ, the groom, James Wilson, took his place at the altar with his best man. His sharp jaw and confident demeanor revealed him to be a successful businessman. James's parents sat in the front row, watching their son with proud expressions. As the wedding march played, the doors to the venue opened. Emily entered slowly, her hand resting on her father Thomas's arm. She was dressed in a pure white designer gown, and a diamond tiara sparkled on her head. Sarah gasped involuntarily. Her sister was truly beautiful. Emily glanced briefly in Sarah's direction, but quickly returned her gaze forward. The cold gesture hurt Sarah's heart, but she didn't show it on her face. The ceremony was conducted solemnly, and James and Emily exchanged vows of love. Sarah placed her hand on Ethan's shoulder, watching the ceremony quietly. Moving to the reception hall, the space was even more luxurious. White rose arrangements adorned the tables, and champagne glasses sparkled. Waiters carried hors d'oeuvre, and bartenders crafted cocktails with elegant movements. When it was time for speeches, James's father stood up first, his speech beginning with, "To celebrate the union of my son and his beautiful bride," was sophisticated, and guests responded with warm applause. Next, Sarah's father, Thomas, stood up. Though he looked a bit nervous, he prayed for his daughter's happiness with touching words. "Emily, from the day you were born until today, you have brought us joy and pride. James, please cherish our daughter. She is a special person." During Thomas's speech, his gaze momentarily turned toward Sarah. There seemed to be sadness and apology in it. Finally, the bride, Emily, took the microphone. "Today, I'm experiencing the happiest day of my life. Meeting James and gaining his love is my greatest fortune. We will build a perfect family together." As she said this, Emily clearly looked in Sarah's direction. Her gaze contained the message. Unlike you, Sarah remained motionless, maintaining a smile on her face. When it was time to eat, waiters began bringing out the course meals. Sarah and Ethan remained standing. Ethan whispered in a small voice, "I'm hungry." Sarah felt a tightness in her chest but gently told him, "Hold on until the cake time, then we can eat something." A maternal aunt who was nearby noticed their situation and offered them empty seats at her table. However, Emily gracefully approached and said, "Aunt, those are assigned seats. The Peterson family will be coming later," and left, ignoring Sarah and Ethan. The aunt looked at Sarah with an apologetic expression. I'm sorry, Sarah. Emily has changed recently. Sarah responded maturely. It's all right. Don't worry. We're enjoying the ceremony. Around that time, Sarah noticed her parents having a serious conversation with Emily. The reception grew even more glamorous. After the meal, it was time for dancing, and the bride and groom performed their first dance. James and Emily moved in perfect harmony, like a prince and princess from a fairy tale. When the floor was open to other couples, Sarah's father, Thomas, came to her. May I have this dance? Her father offered his hand, looking a bit nervous. Sarah was surprised but smiled and accepted. Ethan, Mom is going to dance with Grandpa. Wait here quietly. Ethan nodded obediently, looking around with keen interest. On the dance floor, Thomas gently led Sarah. He looked straight into his daughter's eyes and said, Thank you for coming. I apologize for Emily's attitude. She seems to have lost herself recently. Sarah shook her head. Don't apologize. Dad, I don't mind. This was a lie. She was deeply hurt, but she didn't want to worry her father. Thomas's expression had a shadow, as if he had something to say, but when the music ended, he silently escorted Sarah to the edge of the floor and left to dance with Margaret. As cake-cutting time approached, waiters brought in a magnificent 6-tier wedding cake. The venue's lighting was slightly dimmed, and spotlights illuminated the cake, and the bride and groom gathered around it. Emily rested a hand on James's arm, smiling happily. The host took the microphone and announced, Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the cake cutting by the bride and groom. James and Emily held the knife together and began to cut the cake. Flashlights went off, and the venue was filled with applause. Sarah still stood at the edge, watching the scene from afar. She noticed Ethan had a curious expression beside her. What is it, Ethan? He tilted his head and said in a small voice, I've seen that person before. Sarah followed her son's gaze. Ethan wasn't looking at James, but at Emily. That person? You mean Aunt Emily? Of course. You know her. She's Mommy's sister. Ethan shook his head seriously. No. Did you know? Aunt was with Daddy Michael. Hearing those words, Sarah almost stopped breathing. Ethan, what are you saying? She placed her hands on her son's shoulders and looked him in the eyes. What do you mean? I saw them in the park before, on a day you were working, when Grandma took me to the park. Aunt and Daddy Michael were together. They were both laughing. Something began to connect in Sarah's mind. She tried to calm her breathing, but her heart was racing. Some important piece of information was missing. Do you remember when this was? Ethan looked up at the ceiling, making a thinking gesture. Before Christmas. It was snowing. Last winter. Sarah traced her memory. Around that time, her parents often took care of Ethan, especially when she had night shifts. But Emily and Michael together, what did it mean? Her thoughts were interrupted by the host's announcement that the bride and groom had begun serving cake to the guests. Emily and James, smiling happily, started making rounds to the tables. Sarah noticed her parents watching the newlyweds with subtle expressions. Margaret bit her lips several times, and Thomas had an unnaturally forced smile. Both seemed to be harboring some serious secret. James's parents were also looking at their son and his wife, but especially James's mother's expression seemed to show some concern. She occasionally looked at Emily and moved her lips as if muttering something. As Sarah looked around, Ethan suddenly pulled her hand. Mom, look, it's cake. Emily and James had come nearby. When Emily noticed Sarah, her expression hardened for a moment, but she quickly put on a fake smile. Sarah, thank you for coming, she said formally. It didn't seem like she was genuinely grateful. James greeted Sarah politely. You're Emily's sister. I'm pleased to meet you. He seemed natural in his attitude, apparently unaware that his wife's sister was a single mother. Just as Sarah was about to respond, Ethan's eyes lit up at the sight of the cake. James smiled kindly and said, Would you like a piece? Offering cake to Ethan. Thank you. Ethan politely accepted. However, the next moment, he interrupted the adults' conversation by pointing in the direction where Emily and James were eating cake, saying in a loud voice, Mom, isn't it funny that the baby in the bride's tummy uses Daddy Michael's words? Aunt started saying seriously all the time, like Daddy Michael does. For a moment, it was as if all the sound around them had stopped. Sarah's eyes widened, and the color drained from Emily's face. James looked at his wife with a confused expression. Baby, James's voice trembled. Emily, what is he talking about? Emily desperately tried to smile, saying, nothing, just a child's imagination. He's still small, but James was already looking down at her abdomen. Emily's designer dress skillfully concealed her figure, but if one looked carefully, a slightly swollen belly could be noticed. James's complexion changed. Emily, are you pregnant? People nearby stopped their conversations and began looking at the couple. Emily glared at Ethan with a pale face, her expression mixed with anger and fear. Sarah's parents looked at each other and bowed their heads. Their reaction clearly indicated they knew about Emily's pregnancy. Sarah placed her hand on her son's shoulder, taking a protective stance. In her mind, the puzzle pieces were slowly but surely coming together. Michael and Emily, the meeting in the park, Emily's sudden marriage, and the pregnancy. Emily, are you pregnant? Sarah asked in a low voice. Her voice trembled, but it also contained strength. Emily couldn't answer and bit her lip. James's body began to shake. He grabbed his wife's arm and demanded harshly, explain. A moment of silence dominated the venue. Then, the next moment, James's father stood up from his seat and walked toward his son. His expression was severe, as if a long-held doubt had turned into certainty. Not only the fact of Emily's pregnancy, but also the question of who the father was now hung in the air. James's father stood before the newlyweds with a dignified posture. His voice was low but resonated to reach every corner of the venue. Son, I was right. It was no coincidence that I felt something was off about her. James looked at his father and then returned his gaze to Emily. His face showed a mix of anger and the pain of betrayal. Are you pregnant, Emily? He asked again. Why didn't you tell me? Emily raised her face, desperately trying to maintain composure. I was going to tell you, but after the wedding, I didn't want to ruin our special day. James shook his head. That's not the issue. The issue is, he paused for a moment, searching for words, then said, in a hushed voice, the issue is whose child it is. The venue fell silent. Everyone was listening to their conversation. Sarah positioned her son behind her, trying to protect him from the situation. However, Ethan was watching with curious eyes. James's mother slowly stood up and stood next to her son. Her expression was severe, looking at Emily with accusing eyes. You knew about the pregnancy from the premarital health check, yet you kept quiet to James. Mrs. Wilson's voice was cold. We heard from the doctor last week. We kept quiet to protect your privacy. Emily's face turned pale. That is, James's expression changed. Wait, I was suspicious about the frequent calls to your phone recently. I also saw the name Michael. He looked at Sarah. That's your ex-husband's name, isn't it? Sarah nodded silently. Her heart was pounding, but she maintained her composure outwardly. Emily. Sarah quietly called her sister's name. Is the child Michael's? Emily turned her face away, unable to answer. Her silence told everything. The venue erupted into chaos. Guests looked at each other, starting to whisper. James's relatives showed expressions of anger and shock, while Sarah's distant relatives lowered their gazes in embarrassment. Cornered, Emily cried out, "The baby is James's. Everyone, don't believe this." However, her voice lacked conviction. Sarah's parents exchanged glances and looked down. Their expressions revealed the truth. James grabbed Emily's arm and demanded, "Tell the truth." His anger was uncontrollable, but he still maintained his self-control in public. Under James's pressure, Emily began to tremble. Sarah's father, Thomas, finally couldn't stand it anymore and stepped forward. Enough. Thomas's voice was tired. Emily, you can't keep hiding it. Margaret also stood next to her husband, nodding with tears in her eyes. Sarah, I'm sorry. Thomas looked straight into his daughter's eyes. We knew about Emily and Michael's relationship since last year. That divorce too, stop, Emily shouted. Dad, be quiet. But Thomas continued. Michael and Emily had been meeting secretly for over a year. Sarah, that was the true cause of your divorce. He covered his face with his hands, choking on his words. Margaret began speaking in her husband's place. When we found out about their relationship, we tried to persuade them to break up, but Emily wouldn't listen. And while her relationship with Michael continued, she also started dating James. We couldn't stop her. Sarah closed her eyes. It felt like her world was shaking. The truth about her divorce from Michael, her sister's betrayal, and the fact that her parents knew but didn't tell her the truth, all of it overwhelmed her. Sarah. I'm sorry, Margaret said, crying. We didn't want to hurt you, but by keeping it hidden, we hurt you even more. James was stunned. His eyes showed colors of anger and humiliation. So, you were involved with two men, and while pregnant with one of their children, you were trying to marry me. Emily was crying. Her makeup had smeared, and her beautiful bride image had turned into a miserable sight. James, please, you said you loved me. This child is, James interrupted her words, lies. It was all lies. With a trembling hand, he pulled off his wedding ring and threw it on the floor. The ring made a cold sound as it rolled across the marble floor. He turned to his parents and said, "Let's go." The Wilson family members stood up all at once and began to leave the venue. Other guests were also disturbed and started leaving their seats one after another. Only the Thompson family and a few relatives remained in the venue. Emily had collapsed on the floor and continued crying. Sarah quietly approached Emily. Why? She simply asked. Why with Michael? Emily looked up. Her eyes burned with hatred and resentment. It's all your fault. Because you couldn't make Michael happy. He came to me. Sarah was hurt by those words but didn't lose her composure. It was you who excluded me, stole my husband, all of it. Today's events are the result of your actions. Sarah stopped in front of her parents. They were looking down, seemingly ashamed. Dad, Mom. Sarah's voice was gentle but contained a firm will. Today, I learned many things about my family and about myself too. There's a lot we need to talk about, but that's enough for today. Sarah quietly took her son's hand and said, "Let's go home," preparing to leave. At that moment, her parents stopped her. "Sarah, please, let us talk," her father pleaded. After a deep sigh, Sarah said, "That's enough for today, another time," and left the venue with her son. 3 weeks later, Sarah answered yet another call from her parents. Eager to tell the truth, they requested a meeting at a cafe, though hesitant. Sarah agreed. At a small cafe in Boston, she sat facing her parents. Thomas and Margaret looked aged, and it was evident that the events of the past few weeks had worn them out. Michael and Emily's relationship began more than a year ago. Thomas quietly began. We found out by chance. A friend witnessed them having an intimate dinner at a restaurant. Why did you keep quiet? Sarah's voice was calm, but deep wounds were visible in her eyes. Margaret held her coffee cup with trembling hands. We wanted to preserve the family bond. At first, we tried to persuade Emily, but she wouldn't listen. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if fighting back tears. We thought Emily would marry Michael after he divorced you. We thought they would be together. But Michael ran away from responsibility, and Emily was at a loss, so she sought salvation in James. Sarah looked at her parents with a deeply hurt expression. Family bond. Weren't Ethan and I family? Why didn't you tell me the truth? Thomas covered his face with his hands. We were wrong. In trying to protect you, we ended up hurting you. Please forgive us. Sarah left the cafe without uttering words of forgiveness. However, a small seed of understanding began to grow in her heart. Perhaps her parents, too, were victims who had been manipulated by Emily's actions. 3 months later, Sarah was promoted at the hospital and moved to a better apartment with Ethan. Although her relationship with her parents was still delicate, she allowed weekend visits for Ethan's sake. Emily was completely isolated and was living with her parents. Her marriage to James was annulled, and legal proceedings were underway. Michael, too, had left town to escape responsibility. As autumn deepened, Emily gave birth to a boy. Ironically, having become the same as the sister she once looked down upon, she felt the weight of her mistakes daily. 6 months after the wedding, one evening, the doorbell rang at Sarah's apartment. Opening the door, there stood Emily, holding a baby. Her face was thin, and dark circles of fatigue were prominent under her eyes. Her former beauty had faded, and there stood the realistic figure of a young mother. Sarah. Emily's voice trembled. Could you listen to me, just for a little while? Sarah hesitated for a moment, but seeing the baby dozing in her sister's arms, she quietly opened the door. Emily entered silently and sat on the sofa. Sarah, I'm truly sorry for trying to ruin your life, Emily said tearfully. I know it's unforgivable, but this child is Ethan's brother. They're innocent. After a long silence, Sarah approached the baby and looked at its tiny face. The infant indeed had traces of Michael, but what welled up in her heart wasn't anger, but a strange affection. "What's his name?" Sarah quietly asked. "Thomas. I named him after Dad," Emily answered. Sarah smiled gently and said, "How about some tea? It seems like we have a long talk ahead." As she brought tea from the kitchen, she saw Ethan's bedroom door open. Her son was peering into the living room with curious eyes. "Ethan, come here. There's someone I want you to meet," Sarah called gently. Ethan approached shyly and stared at the baby in Emily's arms. "Is this my new cousin?" he asked. Sarah and Emily exchanged glances, at a loss for words in the face of the bitter reality. However, Ethan's innocent curiosity eased the heavy atmosphere. "He's your brother, Ethan," Sarah said quietly. "Family can be complicated sometimes, but what's important is that we care for each other." Emily cried at Sarah's words. She hadn't expected such generosity from her sister. "I didn't have your strength," she admitted in a small voice. "I was jealous of you." Sarah was surprised. "Of me? You've always carved your own path." "I've always chosen the easy way," Emily replied. The two talked late into the night. Not all past wounds and anger were healed, but a new understanding and respect began to sprout. The sight of the two looking anew at the meaning of true family signaled the beginning of a new chapter.